What if our world didn't start 5,000 years ago? What if it started over? What if everything we call old is actually the dark time after something much older broke down? About 12,000 years ago, something terrible happened. Ice samples show it. Rock layers prove it. Ancient people remembered it in flood stories on every part of Earth. When the Ice Age ended, ocean water rose 400 feet. Whole coastlines disappeared underwater. Cities, if they were there, drowned. Only the tallest buildings survived. Temples on mountains, monuments on high flatlands. The people who rebuilt after had pieces of old knowledge, but not the complete picture. They tried to copy what they found, but couldn't make it as good. What we call ancient Egypt or ancient Sumeria might just be people rebuilding from ruins they didn't fully understand. Tonight we explore what was lost when the ice melted. There are buildings on this planet that shouldn't be here. Stones cut perfectly like a machine did it, made by people who had no machines. Temples lined up with star patterns by cultures who supposedly knew nothing about space. Cities with bathroom pipe systems more advanced than medieval Europe, built when Europe was still covered in ice. For over 100 years, we explained them away. We are running out of explanations. It begins not with a machine, but with stone. Stone that shouldn't exist at that time. Stone cut so perfectly it doesn't match the tools we think they had. Stone arranged with knowledge of math, space science, and building skills that challenges everything we've been taught about how humans got smarter. History tells us civilization is like a ladder. Each generation climbing higher, building on what those before them did. Simple tools turned into bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel. Until we reach computers and spaceships. But what if that story is backwards? What if the farther back we look, the more advanced things become? Across the planet, in places separated by oceans and thousands of years, a pattern appears. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, hunter-gatherers who shouldn't have known such things raised 20-ton pillars in perfect space alignment 7,000 years before the pyramids. In Lebanon, the huge stone platform of Baalbek holds stones weighing over 1,200 tons, cut from rock, and placed so perfectly that no modern crane can copy it. In the Andes Mountains, the puzzle piece walls of Sacsayhuman fit together. So perfectly that a knife blade cannot slide between them in a civilization without iron tools or wheels. In India, the Kalasa temple was carved downward from a mountainside, as if stone were clay, removing 400,000 tons of rock without a single building mistake. On Easter Island, 80-ton statues were moved across the land using methods modern engineers are still trying to understand. These are not made-up stories. These are monuments measured and mapped, standing against our timeline. These monuments span every continent and challenge time itself. If you're ready to explore these mysteries with me, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps this story reach others asking the same questions. Drop a comment where are you right now as you listen and what time is it. Let's see how far across the globe this ancient pattern reaches tonight. For over 100 years, archaeologists explained these unusual things as exceptions. Impressive, yes, but still the work of determined societies using simple tools and endless hard work. But as new technologies show what was hidden, that explanation gets harder to believe. Ground scanning radar finds rooms beneath the Sphinx that are older than the pharaohs. Laser scans uncover huge Mayan cities buried under jungle, far larger than anything in the history books. Sonar mapping reveals buildings on the ocean floor off the coasts of India and Japan, underwater since ocean levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Satellite imaging traces ancient river systems beneath the Sahara Desert, watering lands now dry for 10,000 years. And alongside these physical discoveries, something else appears, a pattern in the myths. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, an age of gods and knowledge that the pharaohs tried to bring back, not create. The Sumerians told of Ons, a being who came from the sea to teach them writing, math, and law. The people of the Andes respected Viracocha, who appeared after a great flood to reteach civilization. The Maya credited Quetzalcoatl with bringing them space science. In India, Manu saved the knowledge of the world through the Great Flood. Different names, different continents, but the same story. We did not invent this. We inherited it. What if they were telling the truth? What if the technologies we see, the perfect stone cutting, the space alignments, the water pipe systems, the earthquake-resistant buildings were not the inventions of early farmers trying new ideas, but the recovered memories of something older? Knowledge passed down through generations who survived a disaster we're only now beginning to understand. The rock record speaks of such an event. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced a sudden terrible shift called the Younger Dryas. Evidence suggests a space impact, perhaps a breaking apart comet struck the northern half of Earth. The signs are clear layers of rare metals in the ice of Greenland, microscopic diamonds formed under extreme pressure, impact balls of melted rock scattered across continents. Huge wildfires swept North America. Ice sheets collapse. Ocean levels rose by hundreds of feet. The megafauna mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats vanished almost overnight. And when the world settled down, when the floodwaters went back and the survivors came out, they began to build. Not rough shelters, but monuments. Not random piles of stone, but buildings aligned to the stars, engineered to survive earthquakes, designed with math perfection that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. The question is no longer whether ancient civilizations had advanced technologies. The evidence is carved into mountains, raised on plateaus, and aligned with the heavens. The question is who taught them? And why do so many of these technologies appear suddenly, fully formed, as if remembered rather than invented? In southeastern Turkey, on a hilltop that commands a view of the surrounding plains, lies the answer to when this knowledge first reappeared. Or perhaps when it was first carved back into stone. But to understand what was built there, we must first understand what came before it. Not the rise of civilization, but its silence. 14,000 years ago, Earth was a different planet. Ice sheets 2 miles thick covered North America and Northern Europe. Ocean levels stood 400 feet lower than today, exposing huge coastal plains now drowned beneath the waves. Woolly mammoths grazed across frozen grassland that stretched from Spain to Siberia. Saber-toothed cats hunted alongside humans in forests that would later become desert. The weather was stable. The megafauna thrived. And then, in what amounts to an instant in rock time, everything changed. Across North America, a black layer of carbon marks the same moment in time the remains of continent-wide wildfires. Impact spherules, tiny beads of melted rock scatter across the northern hemisphere like frozen rain. The rock record speaks clearly. Something from space, perhaps a breaking apart comet, exploded above or struck the northern ice sheets. The weather responded with terrifying speed. Temperatures dropped. The period that followed is known as the Younger Dryas, named after an Arctic wildfire that suddenly appears in the fossil record as forests turn to frozen grassland. Within a single human lifetime, the ice advanced again. Ice-dammed lakes burst their edges, sending walls of water across continents. Ocean levels rose as ice sheets collapsed, drowning coastal settlements beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. The megafauna. Animals that had survived for millions of years vanished in a geological eye blink. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats gone. If anyone lived through it, they would have stories to tell. And they did. Across the planet, separated by oceans and thousands of years, cultures saved the same memory. In ancient Sumer, the gods swore Utnapishtim to build a vessel and carry the seed of all living things, before the waters rose to swallow the world. In India, the first man, Manu, saved humanity by tying his boat to the horn of a divine fish, as the floods swallowed the land. In the Andes, the god Viracocha came from Lake Titicaca after the floodwaters went back to recreate civilization from clay. Among the Hopi of North America, the spider grandmother led survivors into caves beneath the earth until the waters pulled back. Different languages, different symbols, the same pattern: destruction, survival, rebirth. For centuries, scholars dismissed these stories as mythology, beautiful perhaps, but not connected to real history. But as the rock evidence grew, the line between myth and memory began to blur. What if these weren't symbolic stories or moral tales? What if they were cultural memories of real events passed down through generations until they hardened into sacred stories? The flood myths don't just match each other. They match the science. And amid that disaster, amid the rising waters and the dying of species and the collapse of the ice, something extraordinary happened: design survived. After so much destruction, why does advanced building appear so early in the archaeological record? Why do the oldest known monuments show not rough experiments but refined execution? Why does knowledge seem to arrive fully formed, as if it had been waiting in the dark for the world to stabilize enough to receive it again? The answer begins at a place that wasn't supposed to exist. Göbekli Tepe sits on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, overlooking the plains where farming would later be born. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began digging at the site in 1995, he expected to find a medieval cemetery. What he uncovered instead rewrote the timeline of human civilization. Radiocarbon dating placed the site's construction around 9600 BCE, approximately 11,600 years ago. To put that in perspective, it was built more than 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, and at least 5,000 years before the invention of writing. The people who raised these stones were hunter-gatherers. They had no farming, no pottery, no permanent settlements, no tamed animals beyond the dog. According to everything we thought we knew about the progression of civilization, they should have been living in temporary camps, following animal herds, and using stone tools for simple tasks. Instead, they built a temple complex that defies easy explanation. Massive shaped pillars, some weighing between 10 and 20 tons, stand arranged in circles atop the hill. They are covered with detailed carvings: foxes, vultures, snakes, scorpions, wild boars, and abstract symbols whose meanings remain unknown. The craftsmanship is extraordinary: precise angles, smooth surfaces, deliberate composition. Computer analysis of the site's layout suggests that several circles align with the constellation Cygnus, as it would have appeared on the horizon around 10,000 BC. Other structures may correspond to Orion, the same star pattern later echoed in the arrangement of Egypt's pyramids. These were not accidental placements. This was planned, calculated, known. But here's what makes Göbekli Tepe truly impossible. It came before everything we associate with civilization. No farms fed the workers who cut and moved these stones. No cities housed them. No kings commanded them. And yet they organized work on a scale that shouldn't have been possible, moving huge stones without wheels, without metal tools, without work animals. Only human hands, rope, and knowledge we can barely reconstruct today. Klaus Schmidt, who devoted the last 20 years of his life to the site before his death in 2014, called it a cathedral on a hill. Not a dwelling, not a fortress, but a place of gathering and ritual, where scattered bands of hunter-gatherers came together to build something that went beyond survival, a place to remember. And when they finished, when the stones stood aligned with the stars and the carvings saved their sacred animals, they did something stranger still. They buried it. Deliberately, carefully, not through abandonment or natural buildup, but through intentional backfilling. Thousands of tons of earth and rubble were used to cover the circles, sealing them away as if the builders were protecting something, or closing a chapter they could not bear to leave open. Why? Theories vary. Some archaeologists believe it was a sacred burial, a way to keep the sites powered by removing it from the world of the living. Others suggest it was a response to trauma, a symbolic burial of an age that had ended in fire and flood. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the survivors who built Göbekli Tepe carried memories of what had been lost. And when they raised those stones in alignment with the heavens, they were not inventing a new way of seeing the cosmos. They were restoring it. Maybe civilization didn't begin here. Maybe civilization was being remembered here. If that's true, then Göbekli Tepe is not the starting point. It's an echo, a monument raised by people who still knew what the sky had meant to their ancestors, who still carried pieces of geometry and space science and sacred purpose through the dark centuries after the disaster. And if hunters just after the Ice Age could raise Göbekli Tepe with such precision, such knowledge, such perfect space alignment, what else did they remember? Why do similar patterns appear in Egypt, where the pyramids align to Orion's belt, and the pharaohs claim to be restoring the wisdom of the first time? Why does Baalbek in Lebanon hold stones weighing over 1,000 tons, placed with tolerances modern engineers struggle to achieve? Why do the puzzle piece walls of the Andes fit together like three-dimensional puzzles without cement or blueprints? Why does the Indus Valley show city planning more advanced than anything in Europe for the next 4,000 years? Why does Easter Island, isolated in the Pacific, show engineering principles that shouldn't have been understood without formal math? Why do all of these sites, separated by thousands of miles and supposedly unconnected cultures, feel like echoes of the same forgotten blueprint? The answer may lie not in a single lost civilization, but in something more profound: inherited memory. Knowledge carried forward by survivors, encoded in myth and monument, waiting for the world to stabilize enough to be carved back into stone. And when it was carved, it appeared not as experimentation, but as mastery. By 3000 BC, two civilizations appeared on opposite ends of the Fertile Crescent, both along the banks of great rivers that flooded with seasonal precision. In Egypt, the Nile. In Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates. Both would build cities, develop writing, establish law, and align their monuments to the heavens. Both would claim, in their own words, that they were not beginning something new, but restoring something ancient. We call these the cradles of civilization. But what if they were not cradles at all? What if they were reconstructions? The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the most studied structure in human history. And yet, its precision continues to puzzle modern engineers. Approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, with some granite blocks in the King's Chamber, exceeding 80 tons. The base covers 13 acres, and is level to within less than an inch across its entire size, a tolerance that would challenge modern construction equipment. The sides align to the compass directions with an error of less than 1/15 of a single degree. True north, not magnetic north, which shifts over time, but true north calculated through space observation. This is not rough monument building. This is mathematical building on a scale that would not be attempted again for thousands of years. Standard archaeology dates the Great Pyramid to around 2560 BC, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. But even within that standard timeline, something doesn't add up. The pyramid appears in the 4th dynasty, early in Egyptian history, and represents a level of engineering that the Egyptians themselves never surpassed. Later pyramids are smaller, less precise, more likely to collapse. If this were technology gradually improved over generations, we would expect the opposite: rough early attempts giving way to advanced later works. Instead, we see perfection at the beginning, followed by decline. The Egyptians had an explanation for this. They called it Zaptipi, the first time. According to their own sacred texts, the knowledge of the pyramids, the math, the space science, the building skills did not start with the pharaohs. It came from an earlier age, a time when gods walked the earth and established the principles that humans would later struggle to maintain. The pharaohs were not inventors. They were restorers, attempting to rebuild what had been known before the chaos. Before the flood, before the forgetting. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, speak of this clearly. They describe the pharaoh's journey to the stars, to Orion, and Sirius to reunite with the source of divine knowledge. The three pyramids of Giza are aligned to match the belt stars of Orion, a constellation the Egyptians connected with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, the one who survived the flood. Even their own mythology frames them as inheritors, not originators. 1,000 miles to the east, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, another civilization appeared with the same sudden advancement. Around 3200 BC, cuneiform writing appears in Sumer not as picture symbols scratched into clay by farmers learning to keep track of grain, but as a fully working system capable of recording complex details, trade agreements, space observations, and religious hymns. From the very beginning, it was used to document temple inventories, calculate interest on loans, and track the movements of Venus across the sky. There is no evidence of a long experimental phase. No slow change from simple marks to complex grammar. Writing in Sumer arrives complete, as if someone already knew what a writing system needed to do and simply executed it. The same is true of math. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal system base 60 which we still inherit today: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This is not an easy system for people counting on their fingers. Base 10 makes sense for humans with 10 digits. Base 60 suggests something else, a deliberate choice made for math convenience, particularly for dividing circles and calculating time. Why would an early farming society need such precision in circular measurement? Unless they were already watching the sky with the intent to measure it, to track the movements of planets, to calculate space cycles, to align their buildings not just to the compass points, but to the cosmos itself. And align them they did. The ziggurats of Sumer, massive step pyramids crowned with temples, were not just religious buildings. They were platforms for observation. Each level rising toward the heavens, each corner pointed to the compass directions. The Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BC, shows the same careful alignment to true north that would later appear in Egypt. The same concern for geometric precision, the same fusion of building and space science. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Two separate river valley cultures developing in isolation, according to standard history. Both produce huge stone and mud brick buildings aligned to compass directions. Writing systems that appear fully formed rather than changing gradually. Math frameworks based on space observation. Complex calendars tracking sun and moon cycles. Management systems and law codes showing organized thinking. Mythology centered on gods who taught humans after the Great Flood. When the Code of Ur-Nemu appears around 2100 BC, the oldest known law code, it is not a rough draft. It is organized, systematic, complete. Later, the Code of Hammurabi, 1750 BC, expands on the same principles: laws arranged by category, punishments matched to social status, legal examples formalized in writing. These are not societies stumbling toward order. These are societies using frameworks that feel remembered rather than invented. The same holds true for their space knowledge. Both Egypt and Sumer track the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle caused by the slow wobble of Earth's axis. To detect precession requires centuries of continuous observation, careful record-keeping, and math advancement. Yet both cultures show awareness of it in their earliest periods, as if the long watching had already been done, and they were simply recording what they'd been taught. How did two separate river cultures, supposedly inventing civilization from scratch, arrive at such similar cosmic concerns? How did they both know to divide the circle into 360 degrees? How did they both develop writing not gradually but suddenly and completely? How did they both build monuments aligned with precision to true north and specific star patterns? The standard answer is independent invention, that humans, when faced with similar challenges, will develop similar solutions. But that explanation works for pottery or farming or fishing nets. It doesn't account for identical math systems, identical space focuses, and identical claims that the knowledge came from before, from teachers who survived a disaster and passed down what they remembered. If Egypt and Sumer represent the blueprint, the template of what civilization should look like when it appears, then the sites beyond their borders represent something even stranger. Because as we move away from the river valleys and into the mountains, the deserts, the jungles, and the islands, the technology doesn't become simpler. It becomes impossible. The stones grow larger. The precision becomes finer. The engineering challenges multiply. And the questions shift from how did they build this with such limited tools, to how would we build this even with modern equipment? From the cradle of civilization to the edges of the known world, the same pattern repeats: stones that shouldn't exist, cut with tolerances that challenge explanation, arranged in ways that suggest knowledge far older than the cultures that placed them. And the first of these impossible stones rises from the rubble of an ancient platform in the mountains of Lebanon, where blocks weighing over 1,000 tons rest in perfect alignment, placed by hands we cannot identify, using methods we still cannot copy. Ulbeck sits in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, a fertile corridor between two mountain ranges, where trade routes have crossed for thousands of years. Today the site is famous for its Roman temples: the Temple of Jupiter, the Temple of Bacchus, structures of stunning beauty and classical proportion. But beneath the Roman columns, hidden within the foundation of the platform they built upon, lies something far older and far stranger: the trilithon. 3 stones, each measuring approximately 60 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet thick, each weighing an estimated 800 tons. They sit perfectly fitted together, forming a single course in the western wall of the temple platform, positioned 20 feet above ground level. No cement binds them. No gaps separate them. They simply rest edge to edge, supporting the weight of the Roman construction above, with a strength that has survived earthquakes, wars, and 2,000 years of weathering. To understand the scale, 800 tons is roughly the weight of 3 fully loaded 747 aircraft. The largest stones moved during the construction of the Great Pyramid weighed about 80 tons on it, the mass of a single trilithon block. Modern cranes designed for heavy lifting typically max out around 200 to 300 tons, and they require carefully prepared ground, hydraulic stabilization, and teams of engineers calculating load distribution to the decimal point. Yet someone cut these stones from rock at a site a quarter-mile away, moved them across uneven ground, lifted them 20 feet into the air, and placed them with precision that still holds firm. And those aren't even the largest stones of Baalbek. In the quarry itself, still attached to the bedrock, lies a block known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at 1,000 tons. Nearby rests another stone, discovered in 2014 and measured at approximately 1,650 tons, making it the largest work stone ever documented. It was shaped, its edges defined, its surfaces smoothed, and then it was left, as if the builders stopped mid-project and never returned. The standard explanation says the trilithon was made by Roman engineering, an impressive feat of imperial ambition. After all, the temples above are clearly Roman, dated to the 1st through 3rd century CE. The Romans were master builders, famous for their roads, aqueducts, and amphitheaters. But even the Romans documented their most impressive construction projects: triumphal arches, the Colosseum, Hadrian's Wall, and nowhere in their extensive records is there a description of how to move or lift stones of this size. The heaviest stones the Romans are known to have moved: the columns of the Pantheon and Trajan's column weighed around 60 tons. Still impressive, but less than on the weight of the trilithon. Their pulley, crane, and wooden scaffold systems, reconstructed by modern engineers, show limits well below what would be required for 800-ton blocks. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility: what if the Romans didn't build the trilithon? What if they built on top of it? Weathering patterns on the lower courses of the platform show where that doesn't match the Roman temple above. The massive foundation stones appear more worn, suggesting exposure to the weather for a much longer period before the Roman structures were built. Some researchers have proposed that the Romans, arriving at a site already sacred and already built, simply used what they found, raising their temples on foundations laid by hands unknown, for purposes lost to time. If true, the question becomes: who had the ability to move 800-ton stones in an era before Roman engineering, before iron tools were widespread, before the math frameworks we consider essential for such projects were written down? And here's where the mystery deepens: Baalbek is not alone. Across the planet, in regions with no contact with each other, the same pattern appears: Cyclopean stones, blocks so massive they seem to belong to a different scale of construction, fitted together with impossible precision, often in areas prone to earthquakes. At Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cusco in Peru, limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are shaped into puzzle forms, with as many as 12 angles per stone. They interlock like three-dimensional jigsaw puzzles, fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot slide between them. No cement, no mortar, just stone pressed against stone with a tolerance measured in fractions of a millimeter. At Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, andesite blocks, one of the hardest stones on earth, are cut with laser straight edges and perfectly uniform right angles. Shaped grooves, identical in dimension across multiple stones, suggest either templates or match in level precision. The surfaces are so smooth they feel polished. And like Baalbek, these stones were moved from quarries miles away across ground that should have made such movement impossible with primitive tools. In Japan, the huge stone foundations of Osaka Castle and the underwater formations of Yonaguni show similar features: massive stones, tight joints, earthquake-resistant construction. In Malta, the temples of Gantijo are built from limestone blocks weighing over 50 tons, erected thousands of years before the pyramids. In England, the sarsen stones of Stonehenge, though smaller than Baalbek's giants, were moved over 20 miles and raised into position with an understanding of balance stand. Leverage that still impresses engineers. The shared traits are unmistakable: stones far larger than necessary for simple construction, interlocking geometry that spreads stress across multiple contact points, placement in earthquake zones, where their flexibility prevents collapse during quakes, no cement or binding agents, relying instead on weight and precision, evidence of planning and spatial calculation that seems beyond the technological context in which they appear. One idea suggests these massive foundations served as earthquake stabilizers, that ancient builders understood how earthquakes move through the ground and designed bases heavy and flexible enough to ride out the shaking. The irregular puzzle fittings seen at Sacsayhuman and similar sites would allow the stones to shift slightly during a quake without separating, absorbing energy, rather than breaking under it. Another idea explores sound properties. Some researchers have measured sound frequencies within these huge stone chambers, noting that certain stone arrangements amplify or quiet specific sound wavelengths. Whether this was intentional, a form of sound engineering for ritual purposes, or simply a side effect of the stone's mass and arrangement remains debated. What archaeologists do agree on, the Roman phase of Baalbek dates to the 1st through 3rd century CE. The temple complex was dedicated to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus. It served as a major religious center in the Roman province of Syria. These facts are well documented. What remains unexplained: how the trilithon was moved, why stones of such excessive weight were chosen when smaller blocks would have worked, whether the platform beneath the Roman structures came much earlier, and why the same impossible scale of construction appears in cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years. The stones don't answer. They simply remain heavier than history, more precise than accident, aligned in ways that suggest someone, somewhere, sometime knew exactly what they were doing and why. If the Levant holds stones that challenge easy explanation, the Andes take the same mystery and raise it into the mountains, where altitude itself becomes part of the engineering problem, and where puzzle piece walls fit together, as if the builders could see through stone itself. The Altiplano, the high plain of the Andes, sits at 12,500 feet above sea level. At that height, the air is thin. Temperatures swing wildly from day to night, and the ground freezes solid for months each year. Farming is difficult. Breathing is difficult. Moving massive stones across miles of uneven ground should be impossible. And yet, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, the ruins of Tiwanaku rise from the grasslands, like the remains of a civilization that refused to accept limits. Radiocarbon dating places the site's major construction phase between 500 and 900 C, though some structures may be older. At its peak, Tiwanaku was a ceremonial and management center serving tens of thousands of people, its influence stretching across the Andean highlands. But what draws researchers and what challenges easy explanation is not the scale of the city, but the precision of its stonework. Andesite is a volcanic rock, hard and brittle, ranked as 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Shaping it with bronze or copper tools, the metals available to pre-Columbian Andean cultures should produce rough, uneven surfaces. What we find instead at sites like Pumapunku, a section of the Tiwanaku complex, are stones cut with tolerances that feel industrial-shaped grooves identical across multiple blocks, carved with perfect symmetry, right angles measured to fractions of a degree, surfaces polished smooth as if buffed by machine, recessed channels and interlocking projections designed to fit together in 3 dimensions, requiring not just skill, but spatial calculation and ability to visualize how each piece would connect before the cutting began. Some researchers argue that the precision suggests the use of advanced measurement tools or templates, possibly using string grids and standardized units of length. Others point to evidence of harder stone tools, basalt or diorite pounders, combined with sand and water, to gradually wear away the andesite. Experimental archaeology has shown that such methods can produce smooth surfaces and straight edges, though the time and work required would be huge. What remains unexplained is the consistency. One perfectly cut stone might be credited to patience and skill. Dozens of them, cut to identical measurements, fitted together in complex arrangements, suggest something more: systematic knowledge, possibly passed down through generations of craftsmen who understood geometry not as abstract theory, but as hands-on practice. And then there's the engineering. At Tiwanaku, archaeologists discovered something unexpected: bronze clumps. Small metal pieces shaped like the letter I, inserted into grooves carved into neighboring stones. Melted bronze was poured into the channels, locking the blocks together as the metal cooled and hardened. This is not decorative. This is structural reinforcement, an early form of what modern engineers would recognize as tensile strengthening. Stone is strong in compression but weak in tension. It resists being crushed but cracks easily when pulled apart. By tying the blocks together with metal, the builders created a combined structure that could flex slightly under stress without separating. In a region where earthquakes are frequent and violent, this is not accidental design. This is earthquake engineering. The same principle appears hundreds of miles north in the heartland of the Inca Empire, though done with even greater refinement. At Sacsayhuman, the massive fortress overlooking Cusco, limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons, are fitted together in puzzle patterns so complex they seem impossible without computer modeling. Each stone has between 3 and 12 contact faces. Each face cut to match the irregular angles of its neighbors with such precision that the joints appear almost welded. No cement, no mortar, just stone against stone, held in place by gravity and geometric perfection. Run your hand along the seams and you'll find them tighter than the joints in modern masonry. Try to insert a blade between the blocks and it won't fit. The Spanish conquistadors, encountering these walls in the 16th century, believed they were the work of demons or giants no human hands, they thought, could achieve such precision. But the Inca did achieve it. The question is how, and more importantly, why. Modern earthquake scientists have studied these puzzle walls and discovered something remarkable: the irregular jointing makes them extraordinarily earthquake resistant. When earthquake waves pass through the ground, regular rectangular blocks tend to break along their straight edges, creating fracture points. Puzzle blocks, by contrast, spread stress across multiple angles. The stones can shift microscopically during a quake, absorbing and spreading energy without breaking apart. The Inca built on one of the most earthquake-active zones on Earth, along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where one tectonic plate pushes beneath the South American plate, creating frequent and powerful earthquakes. Cusco has been shaken by major quakes throughout history in 1650, 1950, and 1986. And while Spanish colonial buildings collapsed into rubble, the Inca walls remained standing. This wasn't luck. This was knowledge. The same puzzle construction appears at Ollantaytambo, Pisac, and Machu Picchu, all earthquake zones, all built with the same careful attention to interlocking geometry. The pattern suggests that Andean builders understood stress distribution, load-bearing dynamics, and the behavior of stone under earthquake forces. Whether this knowledge came from hands-on observation watching how earthquakes damaged earlier structures and improving their techniques, or from inherited principles passed down from earlier people, the result is the same engineering that expects disaster and builds to outlast it. But stone was not the only material the Andean civilizations mastered. They also engineered the land itself. On the high plains surrounding Tiwanaku, archaeologists have mapped the remains of war raised farming fields, surrounded by water-filled canals. At first glance, they seem inefficient, sacrificing farmable land to ditches. But the system is brilliant. During the day, the water in the canals absorbs heat from the sun. At night, when temperatures on the Altiplano can drop below freezing, the water releases that stored heat, creating a small climate zone that protects the crops from frost. The raised beds ensure drainage, preventing roots from getting waterlogged during the rainy season. Algae and water plants grow in the canals, which are regularly dredged and spread onto the fields as nutrient-rich fertilizer. When researchers in 1982 rebuilt these systems and put them back into use, they found that potato yields increased by 50 to 100% compared to modern methods. A technology thousands of years old outperformed modern farming in the same environment. The Inca expanded this advancement with terracing carved mountainsides transformed into steppe fields that controlled erosion, captured rainwater, and created dozens of distinct small climate zones on a single slope. Each terrace level could grow different crops suited to a specific temperature and moisture conditions, effectively multiplying the productive capacity of the land. This isn't trial and error. This is systems thinking and understanding of water science, heat transfer, and ecology integrated into building design. And then there's sound. At Tiwanaku's Kalasasaya Temple, a raised platform enclosed by standing stones, sound researchers have measured unusual resonance properties. Certain frequencies amplify within the enclosure, while others are quieted. Some scholars have suggested that the spacing and mass of the stones create a kind of sound chamber, possibly used for ritual chanting or ceremonial music. Whether this was intentional remains debated, but it fits a broader pattern seen in huge stone sites worldwide, spaces that seem designed not just for visual alignment with the stars, but for sound interaction with human voice and rhythm. Sound is energy. Resonance is the building up of that energy at specific frequencies. If ancient builders understood that stone could be tuned, that mass and shape and spacing could filter and focus vibration, then their technology was not limited to the mechanical. It was complete, integrating structure, environment, space science, and human experience into a unified design philosophy. The real ancient technology may not have been machines, but mastery of geometry, of resonance, of how energy moves through matter, and how humans move through space. The pattern holds. In Egypt, alignment to the stars and compass directions. In Sumer, math and timekeeping. At Baalbek, stones too large for known lifting methods. In the Andes, earthquake-proof walls, farming systems that work with weather rather than against it, and sound spaces that may have amplified ritual and memory. Separate continents, different materials, the same underlying principles: observe the environment, understand its forces, build in harmony with what cannot be controlled, and encode that knowledge into structures meant to outlast forgetting. The Andean builders harmonized their buildings with earthquake reality, thin air, extreme temperatures, and the movements of the sky. They didn't conquer nature. They learned its language and spoke back in stone, water, and earth. And they were not alone in this approach. Across another ocean, in a river valley that would become the cradle of one of history's most advanced urban cultures, people were building cities where water flowed through every street, and where geometry shaped not just temples but entire cities. The Indus Valley civilization appeared around 3300 BC, in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, along the fertile floodplains of the Indus River and its tributaries. By 2600 BC, at the height of its development, it covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, including over 1,000 settlements. Yet for all its scale, it remains one of history's quietest empires. No grand palaces, no warrior kings carved in stone, no victory inscriptions celebrating conquest. What it left instead was something stranger: cities so logically planned, so systematically organized, that they seem less like the organic growth of human settlement, and more like blueprints executed with deliberate precision. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, and the first thing you notice is the grid. Streets cross at right angles, dividing the city into rectangular blocks. Main avenues run north-south and east-west, aligned to the compass directions with the same careful accuracy seen in Egypt and Sumer. The buildings themselves are made from standardized bricks, not random sizes, but uniform dimensions following a precise ratio of 124, thickness to width to length. Thousands upon thousands of bricks, all following the same mathematical relationship. This is not accidental. This is quality control on an industrial scale. But the true genius of the Indus cities lies beneath the streets. Every major settlement had a covered sewage system. Not open ditches or waste pits, but engineered drainage networks with clay pipes, inspection chambers, and soak pits. Wastewater from private homes flowed through channels built into the walls, connecting to main sewers that ran beneath the streets, sloped for best flow, and emptied outside the city limits. Individual houses had bathing platforms with drains. Public wells provided clean water. Waste and fresh water were kept strictly separate. Compare this to medieval Europe, where chamber pots were emptied into the streets and open sewers bred plague. Compare it to London in the 1850s, when the Great Stink forced Parliament to finally address the fact that the city's waste was flowing directly into the Thames. The Indus Valley had solved these problems 4,000 years earlier. And they did it without writing that we can read. The Indus script remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Found on thousands of seals, pottery pieces, and tablets, it consists of picture symbols, animals, geometric shapes, human figures arranged in short sequences. Despite decades of effort, no one has successfully decoded it. We don't know what language it represents. We don't know if it's a full writing system or a form of symbolic notation. What we do know is that it was used for trade, management, and possibly ritual purposes. The seals show standardized weights and measures, another sign of systematic organization. The same units of weight appear across the entire civilization, from coastal Gujarat to the Punjab highlands, suggesting either centralized control or widely accepted rules. Yet there are no huge inscriptions, no king lists, no temple walls covered with the deeds of rulers. The Indus Valley governed itself not through the cult of personality, but through systems, standardized infrastructure, predictable urban layouts, and shared technological frameworks. This absence of obvious hierarchy puzzles archaeologists. Where are the palaces, the weapon caches, and fortress walls that mark other Bronze Age civilizations? The largest structures of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are the great baths, public bathing complexes with waterproof floors and detailed drainage. Not thrones, not armories, baths. It's as if the Indus people valued cleanliness, order, and shared infrastructure over the projection of individual power. And somehow, across an area spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles, they maintained that system for over 1,000 years. Ancient engineering doesn't just match modern urban management. In some ways, it surpasses it. When British engineers first surveyed the region in the 19th century, they unknowingly used thousands of Indus Valley bricks as railway foundation material, perfectly fired, perfectly shaped, still usable after 4,000 years. Meanwhile, the covered sewage systems they were uncovering came 3,000 years before anything comparable in Europe. The Indus cities weren't just functional. They were optimized, oriented to catch prevailing winds for air circulation, designed with wide streets to help movement and trade, built with flood control in mind, raising platforms above seasonal water levels. Every element served a purpose, and every purpose reflected an understanding of water science, geometry, public health, and environmental planning. How does a civilization achieve this level of advancement so early in the archaeological record? Where is the experimental phase? The failed cities with poor drainage and collapsing walls. They should exist. They don't. When the Indus Valley civilization declined around 1900 BC, possibly due to weather shifts and the drying of the Gagra River, its principles didn't vanish. They echoed forward into later Indian culture, encoded not in undeciphered seals, but in building philosophy. Vastu Shastra, the ancient Indian science of architecture, formalizes principles that feel continuous with Indus planning: orientation to compass directions, geometric proportionality, the integration of buildings with natural energy flows. Sacred geometry isn't just decoration. It's a framework for aligning human structures with cosmic order. The golden ratio, the square root of 2, the progression of harmonious proportions all appear in texts describing how temples, homes, and cities should be arranged. Some scholars suggest this represents cultural continuity, a transmission of spatial thinking from the Indus people through oral tradition into the classical Hindu architectural canon. Whether direct inheritance or parallel development, the result is the same: an architectural philosophy that treats geometry as sacred and structures as bridges between earth and heaven. And nowhere is this philosophy executed with more boldness than at Vellore. The colossal temple, carved into the basalt cliffs of Vellore in the 8th century CE, challenges every reasonable assumption about pre-modern construction. It was not built. It was excavated. The architects began at the top of the cliff and carved downward, removing an estimated 400,000 tons of rock to create a freestanding temple within a horseshoe-shaped courtyard. The structure rises over 100 feet high, spans 160 feet in length, and includes detailed sculptures, pillared halls, multi-story pavilions, and a massive central shrine all hewn from a single continuous rock face. No blocks were cut and assembled. No stones were moved. The entire complex was subtracted from the mountain itself, as if stone were clay, and the builders could simply scoop away what they didn't need. The precision required is staggering. Carve too much and a pillar collapses. Miscalculate the load-bearing capacity of a ceiling and the entire chamber caves in. Make an error in spatial planning, and sections fail to align. There is no room for trial and error when you're working in reverse, when every cut is permanent and every mistake irreversible. Yet the colossal temple shows no major structural failures, no obvious corrections or abandoned attempts. The carvings are symmetrical. The proportions are harmonious. The drainage channels direct rainwater away from vulnerable areas. Someone planned this in 3 dimensions in their mind or on some medium now lost and executed it with such exactness that the structure has stood for 12 centuries. How did they visualize it? How did they measure the removal of hundreds of thousands of tons of stone to ensure that what remained would support itself? Modern engineers struggle to explain the planning method. Some suggest the use of detailed scale models. Others point to the tradition of Shilpa Shastras, ancient architectural manuals that prescribed precise ratios and proportions. But even with manuals, the leap from theory to execution is breathtaking. The colossal temple isn't just architecture. It's proof of concept, proof that ancient builders thought in systems, calculated in space, and understood structural forces at a level we still find difficult to reconstruct. From the planned cities of the Indus, where geometry governed streets and water flowed where it was meant, to the rock-cut impossibility of Colossae, where a mountain became a temple through subtraction, India demonstrates the same pattern seen in Egypt, Sumer, the Andes, and Baalbek: knowledge that appears complete, systems that function immediately, and engineering that feels inherited rather than invented. While India carved mountains and planned cities according to geometric laws older than their texts, another world across the ocean was building pyramids that doubled as calendars, temples that sang when touched, and observatories that tracked Venus with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. In the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, where limestone dissolves into sinkholes and rivers run underground through caves carved by thousands of years of rain, the Maya built cities that encoded time itself into stone. At Chichen Itza, the pyramid known as El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan, performs a trick of light twice each year that feels less like architecture and more like celestial theater. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, as the sun descends toward the horizon, shadows cast by the pyramid's stepped edges create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the northern staircase. 7 triangles of light and shadow form the body, ending at the carved serpent head at the base. For approximately 45 minutes, the effect holds an undulating snake of light connecting the sky to the earth before the sun's angle shifts and the image dissolves. This is not coincidence. The pyramid has 9 terrace levels, each divided by a staircase, creating precisely the geometry needed to generate the shadow pattern at the equinox. The builders had to understand not just the sun's annual path, but the exact angle of light at specific times of year, the height and depth of each terrace, and the orientation of the structure to true north. But the pyramid's precision doesn't end with light. Stand at the base of El Castillo and clap your hands sharply. The echo that returns doesn't sound like a handclap. It sounds like the chirp of a bird, specifically the call of the Quetzal, a bird sacred to the Maya and associated with Kukulkan himself. Sound researchers have confirmed that the stepped pyramid face creates a phenomenon called diffraction, where sound waves reflecting off each terrace arrive at slightly different times, producing a combined frequency that mimics the Quetzal's call. Was this intentional? The math of sound science suggests it was. The spacing of the terraces, the angle of the steps, and the material of the stone all contribute to the effect. It happens too consistently across too many pyramids in the region to be accidental. The Maya encoded sound into their architecture, transforming ritual spaces into instruments that responded to human voice and gesture. A few hundred meters from El Castillo stands El Caracol, the snail, named for the spiral staircase inside its cylindrical tower. Modern archaeologists recognize it as an observatory. Windows and sight lines within the structure align with the rising and setting positions of Venus at its extreme northern and southern points, events that occur every 8 years in the planet's synodic cycle. Other openings mark the summer and winter solstices. The building itself is oriented not to the compass directions but to the northernmost setting position of Venus, suggesting that the Maya prioritized space observation over standard alignment. Why Venus? Because the Maya tracked it with intense precision. Their space tables, recorded in codices that survived the Spanish conquest, calculated Venus's 584-day synodic period, with an error of only 2 hours over 500 years. They understood that 5 Venus cycles equaled 8 Earth years, a mathematical harmony they wove into their calendars, their mythology, and their monuments. Their solar calendar, the Hop, consisted of 365 days, accurate to within minutes of the true solar year. But they didn't stop there. They also used the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Long Count, a continuous day count tracking time from a mythological starting point in 3114 BC. These 3 calendars interlocked, creating cycles within cycles, a temporal machinery so complex that specific date combinations repeated only once every 52 years, and the full cycle took over 18,000 years to complete. This is not primitive timekeeping. This is mathematical space science, advanced enough that Spanish priests encountering it in the 16th century could barely understand its complexity. And while the Maya were mapping the heavens, they were also mastering the earth beneath their feet. The Yucatan Peninsula has no surface rivers. Rain vanishes almost immediately into the porous limestone bedrock, flowing through underground cave systems to the sea. For any civilization to survive here, water management becomes a matter of survival. The Maya responded with engineering adapted precisely to their environment. They built reservoirs to capture seasonal rainfall, lined them with plaster to prevent seepage, and built filtration systems using layers of sand and gravel. They identified natural sinkhole senates and built settlements around them. Where no senates existed, they carved artificial channels to direct runoff into storage systems. At Tikal, one of the largest Maya cities, archaeologists have mapped a complex network of canals, dams, and reservoirs capable of sustaining tens of thousands of people through the dry season. The system required water engineering, calculating slopes, managing flow rates, preventing erosion, executed in a landscape where a single miscalculation could mean drought and famine. To the west, in the Valley of Mexico, the Aztecs took water engineering to even greater extremes. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was built on an island in the middle of a shallow lake, Lake Texcoco. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, it was one of the largest cities in the world, home to over 200,000 people, crisscrossed by canals, and connected to the mainland by massive causeways. The lake was brackish, undrinkable. The Aztecs solved this with aqueducts that brought fresh water from springs miles away, carried on raised stone channels that crossed the lake. They built dikes to separate the fresh and saltwater zones, controlling flooding and maintaining water quality. And they transformed the shallow lakebed into farmland using chinampas, artificial islands built from layers of mud, vegetation, and woven reeds. Chinampas were agricultural marvels, anchored to the lakebed with willow trees whose roots stabilized the soil. They provided year-round growing space. The canals between them offered irrigation, transportation, and a source of nutrient-rich muck that farmers regularly dredged and spread on the fields. Modern studies estimate that Chinampa agriculture produced up to 7 harvests per year, feeding a population density that matched or exceeded modern European cities. When Hernan Cortés first saw Tenochtitlan, he compared it to Venice. But Venice didn't feed itself from its canals. The Aztecs did. And here, in the jungles and lakes of Mesoamerica, the pattern emerges again. The same numbers, the same sky codes, the same sacred geometry that appeared in Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley, reappear on the opposite side of the planet. Precession, the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, shows up in Maya mythology and calendar calculations. Solar alignments mark equinoxes and solstices at Chichen Itza, Monte Alban, and Teotihuacan, just as they do at Stonehenge, Newgrange, and the pyramids of Giza. The division of the circle into 360 degrees. The use of the golden ratio in building proportions. The focus on compass directions and space cycles. These are not inventions isolated to one culture. They are a pattern. How did the Maya, isolated by ocean and jungle from the Old World, arrive at the same mathematical and space frameworks? Why did they encode sound into their pyramids, just as the builders of Tiwanaku and Newgrange seem to have done? Why does their architecture reflect the same fusion of structure and cosmos that appears in civilizations they could never have contacted? The standard answer: independent invention strains under the weight of how specific it all is. The details match too precisely, too often, across too many areas. As the Maya listened to the stars and the Aztecs engineered floating gardens, on the far side of the Pacific, another civilization was learning to hear the earth itself, measuring its tremors, aligning their structures to invisible forces, and encoding cosmic balance into bronze, silk, and stone. In ancient China, technology was never just practical. It was cosmological, an expression of the belief that heaven, earth, and humanity existed in dynamic balance, and that tools, buildings, and knowledge were meant to harmonize with forces larger than themselves. This philosophy produced innovations that seemed contradictory: instruments of precision built to measure the invisible, machines designed to mirror the movements of the cosmos, and systems of knowledge that treated magnetic fields, earthquake waves, and space cycles as aspects of a unified reality. In 132 C, during the Han Dynasty, the polymath Zhang Heng presented the imperial court with a device unlike anything seen before: a bronze vessel nearly 6 feet across, decorated with 8 dragon heads, each holding a bronze ball in its jaws. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad, mouth open, waiting. Zhang Heng called it the hoofing didong yi, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth. We call it the first seismoscope. When an earthquake occurred, even hundreds of miles away, the device would detect it. A pendulum mechanism inside the vessel, finely balanced and suspended, would swing in the direction of the earthquake waves. This motion triggered a lever that released one of the bronze balls, which would drop into the corresponding toad's mouth with a sharp sound, showing the direction of the disturbance. Historical records describe a moment when the seismoscope released a ball, but no one in the capital felt an earthquake. Days later, a messenger arrived reporting a major quake several hundred miles to the west, exactly the direction the device had indicated. For over 1,000 years, historians debated whether such a device could actually work. Then in the 20th century, earthquake scientists and engineers built reconstructions based on Zhang Heng's descriptions. The principle is sound a pendulum inside a resonant chamber, tuned to respond to specific frequencies of ground motion, can detect distant earthquakes before human senses register them. The design works. But here's what matters: Zhang Heng didn't invent earthquake science. He systematized it. His device suggests a long tradition of observing earthquakes, understanding their directional spread, and recognizing that the earth itself speaks in tremors if you know how to listen. Even earlier, the Chinese had learned to listen to the invisible pull of Earth's magnetic field. The first compasses were not used for navigation. They were used for feng shui, the art of aligning structures with the flow of qi, the vital energy believed to move through landscapes, mountains, and rivers. A magnetized lodestone spoon placed on a polished bronze plate inscribed with directional markings would rotate to point south. This allowed geomancers to orient tombs, temples, and homes in harmony with the compass directions and the surrounding topography. The earliest written reference to such a device appears in texts from the 4th century BC, though the practice may be older. For centuries, the compass remained a tool of cosmic alignment, not travel. Only later, by the 11th century CE, did Chinese sailors begin using magnetic compasses for sea navigation, a technology that would eventually spread to the Islamic world and then to Europe, transforming global exploration. But the priority reveals something important the Chinese encountered. Magnetism not as a curiosity, but as a force to be integrated into a worldview where heaven and earth were mirror images, and where human structures should reflect celestial order. In 105 CE, Kai Lun, an official in the Han court, standardized the production of paper from mulberry bark, hemp, and rags. Paper had existed in cruder forms before him, but Kai Lun refined the process, creating a material light enough to carry, smooth enough to write on, and cheap enough to produce at scale. The result was an explosion of literacy and record-keeping. Within centuries, paper replaced bamboo strips and silk as the primary medium for writing. Knowledge that had been expensive to save became accessible. Libraries expanded. Government offices grew more efficient. Scientific observations, space tables, historical records, and philosophical writings multiplied. Paper was not just a medium. It was an amplifier of culture, allowing ideas to spread faster and farther than ever before. Meanwhile, in the laboratories of Taoist alchemists searching for the elixir of immortality, another discovery appeared, this one far more explosive. By the 9th century CE, experiments with sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter produced Huo fire medicine. We call it gunpowder. Initially, it was used for spectacle fireworks, flares, and ritual displays, meant to ward off evil spirits during festivals. The sudden flash and thunder were cosmological theater, echoing the power of lightning and thunder forces associated with heaven's judgment. Only later did military engineers weaponize it, creating fire lances, bombs, and rockets. Both inventions, paper and gunpowder, arrived not through step-by-step trial and error, but as refined systems. The chemistry of gunpowder, the paper-making process, both appear in historical records already functional, already optimized, suggesting long periods of experimentation we can no longer trace. And then there are the machines that mirrored the heavens. Armillary spheres, bronze rings arranged to represent the celestial equator, the ecliptic, and the meridian, allowed Chinese astronomers to model the movements of stars and planets. These were not static diagrams, but instruments of calculation, used to predict eclipses, track solstices, and observe planetary conjunctions with remarkable accuracy. By the 11th century, the engineer Su Song built a water-powered astronomical clock over 30 feet tall. It combined an armillary sphere with a celestial globe and a mechanized timekeeping system, driven by a water wheel with an escapement mechanism, a device that controlled the flow of water to ensure consistent movement. Every quarter hour, the mechanism advanced, moving wooden figures to strike bells and drums, announcing the time in harmony with the stars. This was not a clock in the modern sense, ticking off abstract seconds. It was a cosmic engine, synchronizing human time with celestial time, embodying the principle that heaven and earth moved as one interlocking system. Modern historians of science recognize Su Song's clock as a forerunner to mechanical clockwork in Europe, though it appeared centuries earlier. But within Chinese cosmology, it was something else, a demonstration that the principles governing the stars could be reproduced. In bronze and water that human ingenuity could echo the structure of the universe. Technologies appear fully formed, not as rough prototypes. The seismoscope, the compass, paper, gunpowder, the astronomical clock each arrives in historical records already advanced, already functional. Chinese technology was never separated from philosophy. The seismoscope didn't just detect earthquakes, it maintained the emperor's connection to the mandate of heaven by monitoring cosmic disturbances. The compass aligned human dwellings with universal forces. The astronomical clock synchronized ritual with the heavens. Even gunpowder, before it became a weapon, was a tool for cosmic spectacle. This is complete technology engineering inseparable from cosmology, tools designed not just to solve problems, but to harmonize human action with invisible patterns. From Egypt's alignment to Orion, to Sumer's BASC60 math, to the Maya's Venus tables, to China's instruments for measuring the unseen, the same impulse repeats the belief that knowledge is not invented from nothing, but recovered drawn from observation of cycles larger than individual lives, encoded into structures and systems meant to outlast the forgetting. While China measured the tremors of the earth and modeled the heavens in bronze and water, out in the Pacific, an island people were moving mountains with song, transporting 80-ton statues across barren landscapes, using nothing but rope, rhythm, and an understanding of balance that modern engineers are only beginning to reconstruct. The Sur Island Rapa Nui to its inhabitants is one of the most isolated places on Earth. The nearest inhabited land lies over 1,200 miles away. It is a volcanic speck in the vast emptiness of the Pacific, barely 64 square miles of windswept grass and stone. And yet on this remote island, Polynesian settlers carved nearly 900 statues from volcanic tuff, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing up to 80 tons. The moai, as they're called, weren't set up where they were carved. They were moved sometimes miles from the quarry at Raino Araku to ceremonial platforms around the island's edge. The standard assumption for decades was that the statues were dragged horizontally on wooden sledges or rollers, requiring massive workforces and vast amounts of timber. But experiments in the 1980s and 2010s revealed something startling: the statues may have been moved upright, walking across the landscape. By attaching ropes to the statue's head and base, small teams of people, sometimes fewer than 20, could rock the moai forward in a rhythmic side motion. The statue's center of gravity, carefully calculated in its design, allowed it to pivot on its rounded base without tipping. Step by step, coordinated through chant and rhythm, the statues advanced across the ground like massive stone puppets. Impossible stones moved without trees, without wheels, without work animals, just human coordination, hence an understanding of physics, and rhythm as a tool for synchronization. The island's challenges were extreme. By the time European explorers arrived in 1722, Rapa Nui had been almost entirely deforested. Whether through overuse, drought, or rat-eating of palm seeds remains debated. Without large trees, the islanders had no timber for boats capable of long voyages, no wood for rollers or sledges in the quantities earlier theories required. And yet the statues had been moved. The platforms had been built. The island had sustained a population of thousands. The solution lay not in industrial scale, but in knowledge, understanding leverage, balance, and the physics of motion so well that brute force became unnecessary. The Sur Island holds another mystery: Rongorongo, a writing system found on wooden tablets unique to the island. The glyphs, stylized humans, birds, fish, and geometric shapes, are arranged in a rare format called reverse bistrophodon, where each line alternates direction and is read upside down relative to the previous line. No one has successfully decoded it. The script may represent a full language, a memory system for oral recitation, or a calendar and ritual notation. What matters is its existence and independent development of writing in one of the most isolated places on Earth, suggesting that literacy and symbolic encoding were not confined to river valleys and farming empires, but could appear wherever humans needed to preserve knowledge across generations. But the true technological genius of the Pacific Islanders wasn't recorded in stone or script. It lived in their bodies and their minds. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes without maps, compasses, or written charts. They navigated by stars, reading their rising and setting points along the horizon. They read ocean swells, detecting the subtle interference patterns created when waves reflected off distant islands still below the horizon. They watched birds, certain species that flew out to fish during the day, but returned to land each night, pointing the way. They observed clouds, noting how fluffy formations tend to gather over islands, visible from miles away. This wasn't guesswork. It was hands-on science, transmitted through oral tradition, apprenticeship, and embodied practice. Navigators memorized star compasses, mental maps of the sky divided into directional houses, tracking the positions of stars as they rose and set throughout the year. They learned to feel the direction of swells beneath the hull, distinguishing between wind-driven chop and the deeper, steadier rhythms of ocean currents. Modern reconstructions of Polynesian voyaging canoes, sailed by navigators trained in traditional methods, have successfully completed journeys of over 2,000 miles, using only these techniques, proving what Western scholars once dismissed as impossible. For centuries, European anthropologists underestimated Polynesian capabilities, assuming that isolated island populations couldn't possess advanced technologies. The statues of Easter Island were attributed to lost continents or extraterrestrial visitors. Polynesian seafaring was dismissed as accidental drift rather than intentional exploration. The evidence now proves otherwise. Carbon dating, language analysis, and genetic studies confirmed that Polynesians intentionally colonized islands across the Pacific from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island between 1000 BCE and 1200 CE, navigating by methods that required generations of accumulated knowledge, precise observation, and mathematical understanding of celestial and oceanic patterns. The simple islanders possessed technologies as profound as any monument, the ability to read the world as a text, to carry knowledge without writing it down, and to move across vast distances guided by stars and swells. From mountains to islands, rivers to deserts, the pattern repeats. The Göbekli Tepe rising from the Anatolian plateau 11,600 years ago, aligned to constellations before farming existed. Baalbek's 800-ton stones lifted and placed with precision no known ancient technology should have achieved. Tiwanaku's earthquake-proof walls and bronze rainforest platforms on the high altiplano. Mohenjo-Daro's grippland streets and covered sewage systems, organized with a level of advancement Europe wouldn't match for 3,000 years. The Maya's acoustic pyramids and Venus tables accurate too within hours over centuries. China's seismoscopes and water-driven clocks mirroring the cosmos. Easter Island's walking statues and Polynesian navigators crossing oceans by reading stars and swells. Different continents, different materials, different languages but the same underlying principles. Precision engineering that challenges the supposed limitations of its time, sacred geometry woven into foundations and alignment space knowledge, requiring generations of continuous observation, water management and urban planning, far ahead of what standard timelines predict. Knowledge that appears not gradually through trial and error, but suddenly, complete, functional, as if inherited rather than invented. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. And patterns suggest structure. And now modern technology is revealing just how much we haven't seen. Ground-penetrating radar scans beneath the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau have detected voids, chambers, and passages that came before the known construction phases, hinting at layers of history still buried beneath the sand. Lighter light detection and ranging has transformed our understanding of the Maya world, revealing vast city networks hidden under jungle canopy, far larger and more interconnected than the visible. Runes suggested. Entire urban systems, invisible from the ground, mapped in days. Sonar surveys off the coasts of India and Japan have found underwater structures, walls, platforms, stone arrangements resting on ocean floors that were dry land when sea levels were lower, before the Ice Age ended, and the oceans rose. Satellite imaging has traced ancient river systems beneath the Sahara, dry for 10,000 years, showing where water once flowed through landscapes now barren, supporting populations we can only guess at from the absence of ruins. The Earth is giving up its secrets. And the deeper we look, the older the evidence becomes. Which brings us to the question that ties everything together. What if history is not a line but a spiral? What if civilization doesn't progress in a single upward arc from primitive to advanced, but moves in cycles, rising, falling, forgetting, and remembering? The Younger Dryas stands as evidence of such a cycle. A global disaster 12,800 years ago that reset the world, drowning coastlines, collapsing ice sheets, wiping out megafauna, and scattering survivors into a landscape transformed. And in the aftermath, knowledge reappeared not as invention, but as restoration. The survivors built not crude shelters, but astronomically aligned temples. They encoded not simple tallies, but complex calendars. They moved not small stones, but megaliths. They acted as if they were rebuilding something they remembered. The technologies that shouldn't have existed may not be unusual things. They may be survival's pieces carried forward by people who witnessed the disaster, who saved what they could, and who passed it down through story, ritual, and stone, until the world stabilized enough to carve it back into permanence. But here's the deeper realization: the real ancient technology wasn't machines. It was consciousness. It was the ability to watch the sky for generations and recognize patterns invisible to a single lifetime. It was the capacity to observe earthquakes, floods, and seasons, and encode that knowledge into structures that would outlast the observers. It was understanding resonance, how sound moves through stone, how energy flows through water, how geometry harmonizes space with cosmos. It was pattern recognition at a civilization-wide scale, long-term thinking, the integration of environment, space science, sound, and memory into systems so complete they feel almost biological. Knowledge wasn't stored in books or hard drives. It was encoded in alignments, in the spacing of pillars, in the angles of walls, in myths that matched geology, in calendars that counted not years but ages. The ancients didn't lack technology. They had a different technology, one that prioritized permanence over convenience, harmony over domination, memory over progress. And so we arrive at the final question, the one that connects us to everyone who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered, are we the first advanced civilization, or just the latest? When future archaeologists sift through the ruins of our cities, if such archaeologists exist, will they marvel at our steel and silicon? Will they ask how we built towers so tall, moved information so fast, split atoms, and sequenced genomes? Will they say our technologies shouldn't have existed for our time? Or will they find only the stones that outlasted everything else, the dams, the bridges, the foundations, and wonder, as we do now, what we knew and how we knew it? The pattern suggests this has happened before. That knowledge rises and falls like tides. That forgetting is as inevitable as remembering. That we are not climbing towards some final summit, but walking a spiral that curves back on itself, each civilization retracing steps taken by those who came before, each one believing itself to be the first. Perhaps the ruins we study are not relics of the primitive, but reflections of ourselves in another age, builders who also watched the stars, who also sought to leave something permanent, who also believed their knowledge would endure. So tonight, wherever you are in a city of steel and light, or under a sky still dark enough to see the stars, consider this: where are you listening from tonight? And in which cycle of history do you think you've awakened?